Russia has a upper-middle-income mixed economy with state ownership in strategic areas of the economy. Market reforms in the 1990s privatized much of Russian industry and agriculture, with notable exceptions to this privatization occurring in the energy and defense-related sectors. Russia's vast geography is an important determinant of its economic activity, with some sources estimating that Russia contains over 30% of the world's natural resources. The World Bank estimates the total value of Russia's natural resources at $75 trillion US. Russia relies on energy revenues to drive most of its growth. Russia has an abundance of oil, natural gas and precious metals, which make up a major share of Russia's exports. As of 2012, the oil and gas sector accounted for 16% of the GDP, 52% of federal budget revenues and over 70% of total exports. Russia has a large and sophisticated arms industry, capable of designing and manufacturing high-tech military equipment, including a fifth-generation fighter jet, nuclear-powered submarines, firearms, short-range, long-range ballistic missiles. The value of Russian arms exports totaled $15.7 billion in 2013, second only to the U.S. Top military exports from Russia include combat aircraft, air defense systems, ships and submarines. In 2015, the Russian economy was the sixth largest in the world by PPP and 12th largest at market exchange rates. Between 2000 and 2012, Russia's energy exports fueled a rapid growth in living standards, with real disposable income rising by 160%. In dollar-denominated terms, this amounted to a more than sevenfold increase in disposable incomes since 2000. In the same period, unemployment and poverty more than halved and Russians' self-assessed life satisfaction also rose significantly. This growth was a combined result of the 2000s commodities boom, high oil prices, as well as prudent economic and fiscal policies. However, these gains have been distributed unevenly. The 110 wealthiest individuals were found in a report by Credit Suisse to own 35% of all financial assets held by Russian households. Poor governance means that Russia also has the second largest volume of illicit money outflows, having lost over $880 billion between 2002 and 2011 in this way. Since 2008, Forbes has repeatedly named Moscow the billionaire capital of the world. The Russian economy risked going into recession from early 2014 mainly as a result of the falling oil prices, the 2014 Russian military intervention in Ukraine and the subsequent capital flight. However, the 2014 GDP growth remained positive at 0.6%. In 2015, the Russian economy shrunk by 3.7% and is expected to shrink further in 2016. However, the World Bank and the IMF estimate that Russia's economy will begin to recover by 2017. In January 2016, the U.S. company Bloomberg rated Russia's economy as the 12th most innovative in the world, up from 14th in January 2015 and 18th in January 2014. Russia has the world's 15th highest patent application rate, the 8th highest concentration of high-tech public companies, such as internet and aerospace, and the third highest graduation rate of scientists and engineers. Alexei Kudrin, the ex-finance minister, said that Russia needs to reduce geopolitical tensions to improve the economic conditions. Economic history. Soviet economy. By the 1970s, the Soviet Union entered the era of stagnation. The complex demands of the modern economy and inflexible administration overwhelmed and constrained the central planners. The volume of decisions facing planners in Moscow became overwhelming. The cumbersome procedures for bureaucratic administration foreclosed the free communication and flexible response required at the enterprise level for dealing with worker alienation, innovation, customers, and suppliers. From 1975 to 1985, corruption and data fiddling became common practice among bureaucracy to report satisfied targets and quotas, thus entrenching the crisis. Since 1986, Mikhail Gorbachev attempted to address economic problems by moving towards a market-oriented socialist economy. Gorbachev's policies had failed to rejuvenate the Soviet economy, though. Instead, perestroika set off a process of political and economic disintegration, culminating in the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991. Transition to market economy. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia had undergone a radical transformation, moving from a centrally planned economy to a globally integrated market economy. Corrupt and haphazard privatization processes turned over major state-owned firms to politically connected oligarchs, which has left equity ownership highly concentrated. Yeltsin's program of radical, market-oriented reform came to be known as a shock therapy. It was based on the recommendations of the IMF and a group of top American economists, including Larry Summers. The result was disastrous, with real GDP falling by more than 40% by 1999, hyperinflation which wiped out personal savings, crime and destitution spreading rapidly. The majority of state enterprises were privatized amid great controversy and subsequently came to be owned by insiders for far less than they were worth. For example, the director of a factory during the Soviet regime would often become the owner of the same enterprise. Under the government's cover, outrageous financial manipulations were performed that enriched a narrow group of individuals at key positions of business and government. Many of them promptly invested the newfound wealth abroad, producing an enormous capital flight. Difficulties in collecting government revenues amid the collapsing economy and a dependence on short-term borrowing to finance budget deficits led to the 1998 Russian financial crisis. In the 1990s, Russia was the largest borrower for the International Monetary Fund, with loans totaling $20 billion. The IMF was the subject of criticism for lending so much, as Russia introduced little of the reforms promised for the money, and a large part of these funds could have been diverted from their intended purpose and included in the flows of capital that left the country illegally. Recovery and growth. Russia bounced back from the August 1998 financial crash with surprising speed. Much of the reason for the recovery was devaluation of the ruble, which made domestic producers more competitive nationally and internationally. Between 2000 and 2002, there was a significant amount of pro-growth economic reforms, including a comprehensive tax reform, which introduced a flat income tax of 13%, and a broad effort at deregulation, which improved the situation for small and medium-sized enterprises. Between 2000 and 2008, Russian economy got a major boost from rising commodity prices. GDP grew on average 7% per year. Disposable incomes more than doubled, and in dollar-denominated terms increased eightfold. The volume of consumer credit between 2000 to 2006 increased 45 times, fueling a boom in private consumption. The number of people living below poverty line declined from 30% in 2000 to 14% in 2008. Inflation remained a problem, however, as the central bank aggressively impressively expanded money supply to combat depreciation of the ruble. Nevertheless, in 2007 the World Bank declared that the Russian economy achieved unprecedented macroeconomic stability. Until October 2007, Russia maintained impressive fiscal discipline with budget surpluses every year from 2009 to 14. Russian banks were hit by the global credit crunch in 2008, though no long-term damage was done thanks to proactive and timely response by the government and central bank, which shielded the banking system from effects of the global financial crisis. A sharp but brief recession in Russia was followed by a strong recovery beginning in late 2009. The GDP of Russia increased by 10 times in 2009 as compared with the previous values. The value reached up to $1.223 trillion United States dollars. After 16 years of negotiations, Russia's membership to the WTO was accepted in 2011. In 2013, Russia was labeled a high-income economy by the World Bank. Russian leaders repeatedly spoke of the need to diversify the economy away from its dependence on oil and gas and foster a high-technology sector. In 2012, oil, gas and petroleum products accounted for over 70% of total exports. This economic model appeared to show its limits when, after years of strong performance, Russian economy expanded by a mere 1.3% in 2013. Several reasons have been proposed to explain the slowdown, including prolonged recession in the EU, which is Russia's largest trading partner, stagnant oil prices, lack of spare industrial capacity and demographic problems. Political turmoil in neighboring Ukraine added to the uncertainty and suppressed investment. According to a survey provided by Financial Times in 2012, Russia was second by economic performance among G20, following Saudi Arabia. Economic performance estimate on 7 measures: gross domestic product growth, budget deficit and government debt for 2012, economic recovery output compared with the pre-crisis peak, change in debt since 2009, change in unemployment from 2009 to 2013, and, finally, the deviation of the current account from balance. Forbes magazine lists Russia as number 91 in the best countries for business. The country has made substantial improvement recently in areas like innovation and trade freedom. Since 2008, Moscow has been by Forbes magazine repeatedly named the billionaire capital of the world. 2014 present. Following the annexation of Crimea in March 2014 and Russia's reported involvement in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, the United States, the EU, Canada and Japan imposed sanctions on Russia's financial, energy and defense sectors. Some EU member countries were split on further sanctions, but have nominated to go down the sanctions route. This led to the decline of the Russian ruble and sparked fears of a Russian financial crisis. Russia responded with sanctions against a number of countries, including a one-year period of total ban on food imports from the European Union and the United States. According to the Russian Economic Ministry in July 2014, GDP growth in the first half of 2014 was 1%. The ministry projected growth of 0.5% for 2014. The Russian economy grew by a better-than-expected 0.6% in 2014. As of the second quarter of 2015, inflation, compared to the second quarter of 2014, was 8%. The economy had contracted by 4.6% as the economy entered recession. To balance the state budget in 2015, oil price would need to be around $74 as opposed to $104 for 2014. Russia used to have around $500 billion in forex reserves, but holds $360 billion in summer 2015 and plans to keep accumulating forex reserves for years to come, until they reach again $500 billion. According to Herman Griff from Bank, the contraction of Russian economy is not a crisis but rather a new reality to which it has to adapt, primarily due to the low oil prices. He also presented a number of metrics demonstrating that the GDP has fallen by 3.7%, income by 4.3%, salaries by 9.3%, and inflation reached 12.9%. During 2014-2015, a quarter of banks in Russia left the market. The expenses of Russian Bank Guarantee Fund reached 1 trillion rubles, plus additional government funds for recapitalization of banks reached 1.9 trillion rubles. In Q1 2016, there were over 130 industrial actions related to notorious salary delays and mass layoffs in production facilities in all regions of Russia, including military and defense industries. Growth of Russian GDP. The annual growth of the Russian GDP according to World Bank, Currency and Central Bank. Russian ruble is the unit of currency of the Russian Federation. It is also accepted as legal tender in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Russian monetary system is managed by the Bank of Russia, founded on 13 July 1990 as the State Bank of the RSFSR. Bank of Russia assumed responsibilities of the central bank following the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991. According to the Constitution, Bank of Russia is an independent entity, with the primary responsibility of protecting the stability of the national currency, the ruble. It is also chief regulator and a lender of last resort for the banking industry in Russia. Bank of Russia is governed by a board of directors, headed by a governor who is appointed by the President of Russia. Large current account surpluses caused rapid real appreciation of the ruble between 2000 and 2008. Bank of Russia attempted to combat this trend by aggressively accumulating foreign currency reserves. This was a major contributing cause to relatively high inflation rates during this period. Central bank policy evolved following the global financial crisis. Instead of targeting a fixed exchange rate versus a basket of dollar and euro, Bank of Russia shifted its focus to inflation targeting. In April 2012, Russian inflation reached record low of 3.6%. The Russian Central Bank has been planning to free float the Russian ruble and has been widening the currency's trading band and expects the ruble to be fully free floating in 2015. However, the ruble has fell significantly since 2013 when the central bank announced the plans. On 3 October 2014, the USD-RUB exchange reached 40.00 Russian rubles to USD, up from 32.19 rubles the same time last year. This represents a decline of 24.26%. The Russian Central Bank has stated that Russian banks are able to withstand a devaluation of up to 25% to 30% in January 2014 when the ruble has just begun its decline. Therefore, central bank intervention may be needed. However, plans to free float the currency continued. As of January 2014, the Russian Central Bank spent $88 billion in order to stem the fall of the ruble in 2014. Due to central bank intervention and stronger oil prices, the ruble rebounded sharply at the beginning of 2015. In April 2015, Ksenia Yudeva, Bank of Russia's first deputy governor, stated that she believed the currency has stabilized at the present rate of around 50 rubles to USD. Along with a rapid devaluation of the ruble, inflation in Russia has greatly increased. In 2012, inflation was at one of its lowest points since the fall of the Soviet Union at 3.6%. In October 2014, the rate of inflation was reported to be 8%, although this is well below the 2,333.30% inflation rate experienced in 1992. Public policy, fiscal policy, central and local government expenditures are about equal. Combined, they come to about 38% of GDP. Fiscal policy has been very disciplined since the 1998 debt crisis. The overall budget surplus for 2001 was 2.4% of GDP, allowing for the first time in history for the next year's budget to be calculated with the surplus. Much of this growth, which exceeded most expectations for the third consecutive year, was driven by consumption demand. Analysts remain skeptical that high rates of economic growth will continue, particularly since Russia's planned budgets through 2005 assume that oil prices will steadily increase. Low oil prices would mean that the Russian economy would not achieve its projected growth. However, high oil prices also would have negative economic effects, as they would cause the ruble to continue to appreciate and make Russian exports less competitive. The 2007 budget law incorporates a 25% increase in spending, much of it for public sector salary increases, pension increases and social work. Spending on education is targeted to increase by 60% based on 2006 legislation, and spending on healthcare is to increase by 30%. Funding for the 4 national projects, undertakings in agriculture, education, housing and healthcare, will increase by 85 billion rubles over the 2006 figure to 230 billion rubles. National Wealth Fund. On 1 January 2004, the Stabilization Fund of the Russian Federation was established by the government of Russia as a part of the federal budget to balance it if oil price falls. Now the Stabilization Fund of the Russian Federation is being modernized. Stabilization Fund of the Russian Federation will be divided into 2 parts on 1 February 2008. The first part will become a reserve fund equal to 10% of GDP, and will be invested in a similar way as Stabilization Fund of the Russian Federation. The second part will be turned into the National Prosperity Fund of Russian Federation. Deputy Finance Minister Sergei Storchak estimates it will reach 600 to 700 billion rubles by 1 February 2008. The National Prosperity Fund is to be invested into more risky instruments, including the shares of foreign companies. Public debt. Russia has very low debt-to-GDP ratio. It is among the lowest ratios in the world. Most of its external debt is private. Its debt-to-GDP ratio was in 2016 is at 12%. As a chief successor state to the Soviet Union, Russia took up the responsibility for paying USSR's external debts. In the June 2002 G8 summit, leaders of the 8 nations signed a statement agreeing to explore cancellation of some of Russia's old Soviet debt to use the savings for safeguarding materials in Russia that could be used by terrorists. Under the proposed deal, $10 billion would come from the United States and $10 billion from other G8 countries over 10 years. Strategic sectors and enterprises. In the Russian law, there are sectors of the economy which are considered to be crucial for national security, and foreign companies are restricted from owning them. Investments in the so-called strategic strategic sectors are defined in a law adopted by the Federal Assembly of Russia. Strategic enterprises are a list of state-owned corporations which privatization and new share issues of require explicit approval of the president. It began with a presidential decree with list of more than 1,000 state-owned firms dated from 2004, which was amended several times. Protectionism. Russia has recently come to attention as a leading nation for protectionist policies. According to the independent Global Trade Alert, Russia put more protectionist policies in place than any other country in 2013. Russia's strategic trading bloc consisting of Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan was responsible for 33% of worldwide protectionism during the year. Of the protectionist policies, 43.4% were targeted bailouts and direct subsidies for local companies, while 15.5% were tariff measures.